We're going to finish the 19th chapter of Superman the Last Son of Krypton by Elliot S. Maughan. We heard the story of how Superboy built a lab for Lex Luthor to use, saw fire, burned it down, Luthor's hair burned off. Luthor decided that he was going to dedicate his life, instead of to scientific pursuits, to hating Superboy. And I stopped in the middle of a paragraph last time, so I will begin with that chapter now. With that paragraph now. Superman came to understand, as Luthor did not, that while Luthor's soul might be as durable as that of any other creature in the universe, the vulnerable and sensitive body of a mortal can withstand only a certain amount of greatness before it must balance that with venality. Superman occasionally thought to devise some way to give Luthor superpowers, then thought better of it. Luthor was damaged at the same time and with the same terrible efficiency that Superboy had been nurtured. Luthor had never killed a human being, had never been directly responsible for a man or woman's death. The entire mass of his hatred was directed at Superman, who was thankful to take the hatred and leave only Luthor's disdain for the rest of the human community. The Kryptonian became upset whenever he thought of the man who had been his boyhood friend. Superman could only hope that someday God would have mercy on Lex Luthor's tortured soul. The pair stood outside the walls of the prison as dawn broke, Superman telling what nothing he knew about the situation, Luthor insisting that they should go to Oryx separately, and that he was perfectly capable of getting there almost as quickly as Superman. For a man with an amazingly creative intellect, who had been turned out of the family by his parents at the age of 15, who was completely bald at 13, who had no formal education beyond trade school at a juvenile detention home, but who was still considered the world's foremost technical physicist, who had almost never had anything around him intelligent enough to hold his own in a conversation, had anyone around him intelligent enough to hold his own in the conversation, let alone be his friend, and who consequently spoke to pictures and statues of dead geniuses. Luthor was scrupulously sane. When he said he could navigate the distance of 26 light-years in a reasonable length of time, Superman was inclined to believe him. On the trip to Metropolis, Superman did Luthor the courtesy of wrapping him in his cape so that he didn't catch a worse cold than Superman had already furnished him. They could also make the trip faster that way. The cape protected Luthor from burning to a cinder with friction. They landed in the central courtyard of the Metro Modern Art Museum. The city was a ghost town early Sunday morning. "Do you appreciate art, Noodles?" Luthor asked as he unraveled himself from the red cape. "I think so, but my taste is a little more offbeat than these pieces." There was a big, round St. Bernard with the look of a monk standing by a fountain. It was carved from redwood. There was also an aluminum rectangular prison, 12 feet long, and bent in 3 places. Its title was Crushed Cigarette. There were several stabulus, the most interesting of which was a silver and black structure made from several materials. In its center was an ovular plastic bowl, whose top half was clear and whose bottom half was smoky black and opaque. It was surrounded by 8 coiled flat silver surfaces, each maybe 30 feet long, if it were unrolled. The sign accompanying the object called it Black Widow, and noted that the piece was on indefinite loan from the artist when Jeremy McAfee... "There it is," Luthor swelled with unabashed pride. "My flying sailboat." "What?" "It's supposed to be lifted like a glider by a mother craft of some sort, but you'll serve the same purpose." "You're telling me that this 3-dimensional test pattern is your starship? Well, you don't think it's art, do you? Just fly it up about 20,000 feet and let go." Luthor pressed several unmarked points on the apparently smooth surface of the sculpture's central bulb, and the clear portion opened on a hinge like a cracked Easter egg. As Luthor climbed inside, Superman became apprehensive. "What about McAfee? He's a very well-known artist." "He's a Centennious phony, if you like. I'll get a letter from him granting permission to use his sculpture for a space flight as soon as we get back, the minute we touch down on Earth." "Are you telling me that Jeremy McAfee is you?" "I didn't say that." "Who else are you?" Genghis Khan, Joan of Arc, Einstein. Do I ask you your secret identity? Everyone knows you're Morgan Edge anyway. Superman watched himself do a double take. Gotcha! Luthor lifted Superman and his Black Widow 4 miles. Or Superman lifted Luthor and his Black Widow 4 miles into the sky and let go. Majestically as a butterfly coming out of its cocoon, the 8 arms uncoiled as it fell. From each of their surfaces rose 4 triangular sails, black on one side, silver on the other, as if some old sea captain were pulling the strings all at once from outside the bottle. Everything but the pilot bubble was thinner than writing paper, and as it fell at speed approaching 200 miles an hour, the silver sides of all 32 sails glowed with soaked-up sunlight. Its descent slowed, stopped. It rose, it gained speed. The arms and deceptively fragile sails rallied against the rushing wind, but they held, and the wind diminished as the air thinned and the speed increased. By the time it crossed the edge of space, the Black Widow flew faster than a comet. It streaked toward the sun. Within half an hour, Luthor was rolling in an arc around Sol, his ship itself glowing as brightly as a tiny white dwarf with a black egg at its core. It soaked energy from the star, whipped around it like an arm winding up to a pitch. It sprung out of orbit into the northern sky as fast as a photon. As it crossed the threshold of light speed, it entered negative space. Lex Luthor had all time and space at his disposal. What was the difference? He wondered between himself and a Superman. The last son of Krypton followed the sailing ship into the sky, fascinated as its sails swelled with solar energy and disappeared from real space. Superman followed under his own power. There was no way to say where in space he overtook Luthor, since neither was traveling in the visible universe. They swam the catacombs of 1,000 planes of existence. And if, during the trip, they occasionally intersected with the 3 dimensions of their familiar perceptions, it was by chance. As the first trickle of internal combustion engines began their inevitable Sunday flood over the streets of Metropolis, Superman dropped through the green skies of Auric. And that is the end of Chapter 19.